It was a calm, sunny afternoon in the sleepy town of Dahlonega, Georgia, a town where everybody knows everybody and strangers stand out. The kind of place where people wave at each other in traffic and still leave their doors unlocked. On the edge of town, just off the main road, sat a small, old-school diner called Mary Lou's Grill. It wasn't fancy. No shiny chrome or neon lights. Just good coffee, warm food, and a porch with two creaky rocking chairs that overlooked the parking lot. It was the kind of place where the regulars came not just for the food, but for the peace. One of those regulars was James Carter, a quiet, respectful man in his early 60s with a silver beard, a deep voice, and the posture of someone who had seen life through a soldier's eyes. To most folks, he was Mr. James, the nice man who always tipped well and said thank you twice. But what they didn't know, what he never talked about, was that he wasn't just another retiree. He was a Marine Corps veteran with over 20 years of service, including 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He'd been in places most people wouldn't dare to imagine. He'd seen chaos. He'd survived it. And more importantly, he'd learned to master it. That day, James was doing what he did every Sunday afternoon, sitting on the porch, sipping black coffee from a chipped white mug, enjoying the silence. But that silence wouldn't last. Around 2:15 p.m., the calm was shattered by the deep, thunderous roar of motorcycle engines. 6 bikes pulled into the gravel parking lot like a storm rolling in. The ground seemed to shake under their tires. Chrome, leather, and loud laughter filled the space where birdsong had just been. Heads turned. A few customers peeked through the diner windows. The staff inside stopped mid-conversation. The newcomers weren't just passing through. They had that look. The kind of group that moves like a pack. Tattoos, vests with skulls, loud voices, and louder attitudes. James watched quietly. Not with fear, but with instinct. He'd seen men like this before. In bars overseas. In dark alleys. In war zones. The kind who use their numbers to intimidate. The kind who mistake silence for weakness. The leader of the group, a bulky man with a gray goatee and mirrored sunglasses, took a long look around before locking eyes with James. There was a moment. A silent moment. Just a few seconds long, but full of unspoken tension. James didn't look away. He didn't smile. He simply took another sip of coffee. And that's when it began. The bikers walked into the diner, loud and obnoxious, making crude jokes, tossing comments at the waitress, and laughing like they owned the place. But one of them stayed outside. He pointed at James and said loud enough for others to hear, "Hey, old man, you lost, or we're just waiting for your nurse?" The others burst out laughing. James didn't move. Another chimed in, "Look at him, just sitting there like he owns the porch. What's he got? Bingo at 3? James stood up slowly, carefully placing his mug on the porch railing. "I suggest you move along," he said firmly. His voice was calm, but carried weight. The laughter stopped. The air shifted. "You got a smart mouth for a guy with gray hair," the leader said, stepping closer. James looked at him, his eyes cold and steady. "You picked the wrong guy." What these bikers didn't know, what they were about to learn in the most painful way possible, was that they had just poked a bear. And this bear had claws forged in combat. The peace was over, and the storm was about to begin. The air outside Mary Lou's Grill had shifted. What had been a quiet, sunny afternoon now felt tense, like a storm cloud had settled over the diner's porch. The bikers, still chuckling among themselves, had crossed the line from loud to threatening. They didn't just want attention. They wanted domination. And James Carter, former Marine, war veteran, and lifelong fighter, was not the kind of man to roll over. As he stood on the porch, his body language didn't change much. No fists raised. No shouting. Just calm, composed authority, the kind that comes from experience, not ego. The leader of the bikers stepped closer. His name, later learned from police reports, was Rick Chains Mathers, a man with a long rap sheet, known for intimidation tactics and bar fights across 3 counties. His heavy boots crunched on the gravel as he approached, sunglasses reflecting James like he was sizing him up for a fight. "You got a problem, old man," Rick said, cracking his knuckles. James didn't blink. "I told you. Move along." The rest of the gang had now exited the diner. 6 of them stood in a loose semicircle around James. They were laughing less now. There was confusion in their eyes. Maybe it was the way James stood, feet planted, spine straight, eyes sharp. Maybe it was his calm tone. Or maybe it was the way he looked at them, not with fear, but with total control. One of the younger bikers, probably in his 30s, stepped forward. He thinks he's tough. Must have watched too many cowboy movies. James slowly stepped off the porch. The wooden planks creaked under his boots. He walked down to meet them, now standing in the gravel lot, face to face with the gang. Rick looked him over again. You military or something? James nodded. Marine. 22 years. Oh, one of them mocked, Marine alert. We got ourselves a soldier boy. More laughter. But James didn't smile. He looked around at the group and said something that immediately shifted the mood from mockery to unease. You boys have no idea what I've seen. I've watched men die with honor. You don't even know what honor looks like. Silence. And then, Rick shoved him. It wasn't a hard shove, more of a challenge. What are you going to do about it kind of push. But it was enough. Enough to let James know this was going to escalate. Still, James didn't react with violence. Yet, he took a small step back, not in retreat, but in preparation. You just made a mistake, he said. A big one. Rick chuckled and waved the others forward. Let's show this old man how we handle attitude. That was the final straw. Inside the diner, people were starting to notice. Phones were pulled out. Someone whispered to the cook, call the cops. A teenage girl at the corner booth had already hit record on her phone camera. But James didn't need backup. He was the backup. The bikers didn't realize it, but they were seconds away from the lesson of a lifetime. A lesson in humility. A lesson in choosing your battles wisely. James's muscles were relaxed, but his mind was locked in. Years of combat training were kicking in like second nature. He had assessed the terrain, measured the distance, and sized up every man in front of him. 6-on-1 didn't scare him. He'd faced worse. They thought he was just an old man. They were about to find out. He was a Marine built for war. The gang of bikers circled around James like a pack of wolves. To them, this was just another intimidation game, something they'd done a dozen times before. Push someone around, puff their chests, maybe throw a punch or two, and walk off laughing. But this time, they had picked the wrong target. James Carter wasn't nervous. Not even close. While the gang thought they were closing in on an easy victim, he was calculating, observing, breathing slowly, just like he'd done in combat zones overseas. He didn't see 6 bikers. He saw 6 patterns, 6 threats, 6 weaknesses, and he had a plan for every one of them. One of the younger bikers, wearing a bandana and a sleeveless denim vest, got cocky and stepped in too close. He tried to grab James by the collar. Big mistake. With lightning speed, James shifted his weight, grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it behind his back in a fluid motion, and brought him down to one knee, hard. The biker let out a surprised yell of pain, tapping the ground like he was trying to surrender in a wrestling match. The other 5 hesitated, stunned. Was that luck? Did the old man just get lucky? No. What they didn't realize is James Carter had been a close-quarters combat instructor in the Marines. He didn't just fight, he trained fighters. His body still moved with precision and force that no street thug could match. Another biker rushed from the side, swinging a chain. James ducked under it with a perfect sidestep, then delivered a sharp elbow to the attacker's ribs, knocking the wind out of him. Before the chain could swing again, James kicked the biker's leg out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. By now, the diner crowd had gathered at the windows. A couple of customers had stepped out onto the porch, phones raised, filming every second. The local sheriff's office was already getting flooded with calls, but they were still a few minutes away. Another biker shouted, "Get him!" 2 came at once, one from the front, one from behind. But James had been through real ambushes in war zones. These guys, they were amateurs. He pivoted on his back foot, delivering a roundhouse kick to the one charging from behind. The man stumbled, then fell into a row of parked motorcycles, causing a domino effect of chrome and metal crashing to the ground. The 4th attacker lunged, fists flying. James blocked the first punch, parried the second, then struck him with a quick jab to the throat. Not enough to cause serious harm, but enough to drop him gasping for air. For down. Now only two remained, including the leader, Rick. The fifth biker stood frozen in place, hands half raised, clearly reconsidering his life choices. He took one look at the pile of groaning bodies on the ground, looked at James, who hadn't even broken a sweat, and slowly backed away. Smart move. Rick, the leader, was the only one left standing. But his swagger was gone. His sunglasses had slipped down his nose, and the confidence in his voice had vanished. James took a few steps toward him. No anger. No yelling. Just calm, unstoppable energy. "You wanted to make an example out of someone," James said. "Looks like that someone is you." Rick opened his mouth like he wanted to respond, but nothing came out. He backed away, eyes wide, and helped the groaning bikers to their feet. In silence, they limped back to their motorcycles, some of which were now scratched and dented from the fight. Engines roared to life, and just like that, they rode off into the distance. No more threats, no more bravado. Just pain and regret in their wake. James stood there for a moment, breathing slow and steady. Then, with perfect composure, he walked back to the porch, picked up his still-warm coffee, and took a sip. Not a single drop spilled. The parking lot of Mary Lou's Grill had transformed into something out of an action movie. Gravel scattered across the ground. Bent motorcycles leaning like wounded animals. Bikers groaning in pain trying to stand. And in the middle of it all stood James Carter, calm, steady, and unshaken. The same people who had laughed moments ago were now struggling to breathe, crawl, or even understand what had just happened. And the most terrifying part? James wasn't even trying hard. He didn't throw wild punches. He didn't scream. He didn't brag. He just moved with calculated force, like a surgeon with fists instead of scalpel. The last man standing was Rick, the gang's self-proclaimed leader. But gone was the cocky, loud-mouthed alpha. What stood in his place now was a man trying to hide his panic, his bravado crumbling under the weight of realization. They messed with the wrong man. Rick's boots crunched on the gravel as he took one cautious step back. He looked around at his crew, men he used to command, now groaning in pain, some barely able to stand. All taken down in under 2 minutes by someone they had dismissed as an old man. James slowly approached, not aggressively, but with the kind of presence that made Rick feel like every instinct in his body was screaming run. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't throw a punch. He simply stared Rick in the eyes, close enough to hear the veteran's words clearly over the distant hum of passing traffic. "You still think fear makes you strong?" James asked, his voice low and steady. "Because what I see is a man afraid of being put in his place." Rick tried to speak, but his voice cracked. We didn't mean nothing. Just messing around." James tilted his head. "Messing around? You threatened a man you didn't know. You surrounded me. You laid hands on me. That's not a joke. That's a choice. One you'll remember every time your ribs ache." With nothing left to prove and no need to humiliate, James stepped back and gave Rick one final out. "You walk away now, or I put you down like the others." Rick didn't need to hear it twice. He bent down, helped the nearest biker off the ground, and motioned to the others. Slowly and painfully, the group limped toward their bikes. A few couldn't start their engines right away. Some bikes had been damaged when one crashed into the others during the fight. There were no snarky comebacks. No last-minute threats. Just silence, shame, and a whole lot of regret. The crowd outside the diner, now about a dozen onlookers with phones out, watched in stunned silence. Many had recorded the whole thing. Some applauded quietly. Others just stood in awe. As the bikers finally rolled out of the parking lot, engines sputtering and jackets covered in dirt, one thing was clear. They would never forget the name James Carter. And James? He didn't gloat. He didn't pose for the cameras. He simply walked back onto the porch, picked up his coffee, and sat down like nothing had happened. The waitress slowly stepped outside, still wide-eyed. "Mr. James, you okay?" He gave her a small nod and a warm smile. Coffee could use a top-up. She blinked, then laughed nervously. "You just took down 6 guys and one more coffee." James chuckled. Fighting off bikers is thirsty work. Inside the diner, the cook shook his head. That man's a legend. By the time the police arrived, the fight was over, the bikers were long gone, and the only thing left behind was a parking lot full of scuffed boots, broken pride, and a story that was just starting to go viral. By the time the blue and white patrol car pulled into the parking lot of Mary Lou's Grill, the dust had already settled, literally and figuratively. The police officer, Deputy Sandra Hayes, stepped out of the car expecting chaos, maybe a serious injury, or worse. What she found instead was a calm older man sipping coffee on the diner's porch, and 6 humiliated bikers riding off with their tails tucked between their legs. She approached James Carter cautiously. "Sir, we got about 6 calls in the last 5 minutes. Said there was a fight here." James looked up, nodded politely, and replied with a straight face. "Yes, ma'am. They started it. I finished it." The deputy glanced around. A few of the diner patrons, still buzzing with adrenaline, began telling her what happened. But she barely needed their statements. The incident had already been captured from at least 3 angles. Videos were already flying across social media faster than she could pull out her notebook. And those videos? They were gold. Within hours, one of the clips had already hit over 500,000 views. A calm, composed James dispatching an aggressive biker gang with precision and restraint. People couldn't stop watching. The comments came pouring in. "This man is a national treasure. Respect isn't given. It's earned. And this Marine earned it. You don't mess with a warrior who's seen real battles. He didn't even spill his coffee. Iconic." By the end of the night, James Carter wasn't just a respected local veteran. He had become an internet legend. But fame was never his goal. The next morning, a local news van showed up outside the diner. The reporter, all smiles, asked if he'd be open to a quick interview. James politely declined. "I didn't do it to be on the news," he said. "I did it because it was right." The mayor of Dahlonega came by that afternoon to personally thank him and offer a community service medal. James accepted it quietly, and even then tried to shift the spotlight away from himself. "I just stood up," he said. "Anyone can. You just have to choose not to be afraid." The townspeople saw him differently now. The waitress who once called him sir now called him Mr. Marine. Kids asked him questions about what it was like to be a soldier. Veterans from nearby towns came by just to shake his hand. But through it all, James stayed the same. Humble, respectful, grounded. A few days after the incident, a young man came into the diner and sat next to James on the porch. Nervous, fidgeting with a notepad. "Sir," he said, "I saw your video online. I've been thinking about enlisting, but I wasn't sure. Until now." James looked at him, paused, and said, "Don't do it for fame. Don't do it to be tough. Do it because you want to protect the people who can't protect themselves." That young man would later go on to enlist in the Marines. Back at the diner, life slowly returned to normal. The rocking chairs still creaked. The coffee still flowed. And James still sat quietly, enjoying the little things. But now, when the rumble of motorcycle engines passed in the distance, people looked at James and smiled. Because everyone in town, and now thousands across the internet, knew one simple truth. He wasn't just a veteran. He was a warrior with wisdom. A protector. A man who never sought trouble, but was always ready if it came knocking. And when it did, he didn't just survive the storm. He was the storm.